Hello girls, I hope you're staying safe at home. To continue with the pollination and fertilization chapter, today we are going to talk about the agents of cross-pollination. In the last upload, I told you that cross-pollination meant the transfer of pollen grains from the flower in one plant to the flower which is growing in another plant, but it must be of the same species. So for the pollen grains to reach from one flower to another flower, an agent is required. So the most common agents of cross pollination is, one is insect, the other one is wind. Okay, but there are some flowers which are pollinated by some animals or birds, okay, like squirrels, bats, or even by water in the case of some aquatic plants. Aquatic means plants which live in water. So each different type have some special feature so that pollination will take place. So first we will talk about insect pollinated flowers. Okay, insect pollinated flowers in biology is known as entomophilous flowers. Okay, so what are the characteristics? Since they are pollinated by insects, they must attract insects. So for that, the flowers must be large and they must be brightly colored. They must emit a scent so that the insects are attracted to it. And they must produce nectar, which is the food for the insects, and that is why the insects will visit the flower. Now, the pollen grains must be sticky or spiny so that they can stick to the body of insects and can be easily carried by the insects easily, so that when the insects are flying from one flower to another flower, the pollen grains must not fall off. Okay, the stigma must be sticky and it must not hang out from the flower. It must remain inside the flower. It must be sticky. Why? Because when the insect again visits that particular flower for nectar, it will go right inside, and the pollen grain, when it falls on the stigma, must stay on the stigma. So for that, it is necessary for the stigma to be sticky. Okay, the flowers tend to be in clusters. Clusters means together so that it looks big. Conspicuous means easily seen. Okay, especially where the individual flowers are small. Example, dahlia. Please find out what a dahlia is. There are lots growing right now. Okay, next, moving on to wind pollinated flowers. In biology, wind pollinated is known as anemophilous flowers. Okay, now anemo doesn't mean animals. Please keep in mind, you get confused. So the different features which is found in flowers which is pollinated by the wind is, it does not have to attract the wind, it will come on its own, isn't it? So the flowers are small, they are not brightly colored, and they are often dull green, because it is the wind which is going to carry the pollen grain. So the flower does not have to attract the wind, it will come on its own. And so they do not have to produce scent or nectar. And the most important thing is the stamens, that is the anther, must be long and hang out of the flower so that it is exposed to the wind. Example, maize. And another thing, the anthers, which contain the pollen grains, are large and they are loosely attached to the filament so that a little wind, the slightest of the wind, will move them. So this type of anthers are known as versatile anthers. Versatile means easily movable. Okay, and pollen grains must be produced in very large quantities because we do not know whether the pollen will reach the right species of the plant or not. Pollen grains must be light, dry and smooth so that they can be easily carried away by the wind. And the stigmas again must hang out of the flower because it has to receive the pollen grains which is carried by the wind, and the stigmas are feathery so that the stigma can easily trap the pollen grains. Okay, now moving on to water pollinated flowers, it is known as hydrophilous. They are found only in aquatic plants. Since it is pollinated by water, that means the plants must also be living in water. So they are found in aquatic plants. So what are the characteristics? Again, the pollen grains must be produced in very large numbers. In some plants, the pollen grains have a specific gravity almost equal to that of water, so that they remain floating just below the surface of water. Now, supposing this is the surface of water, and if the specific gravity is equal to that of water, what will happen? The pollen grain will not sink. It will remain just below the surface of the water and it will float with water. And in some special cases, male flowers are such that they float on the surface of water until they meet female flowers. Example, Vallisneria. I've told you examples are very, very important. Okay, that means the male flowers, they will detach from the plants. It will separate from the plant and it will start floating along with the water. And when it reaches the female flower, the pollen grains may be transferred. That is, it is all a matter of chance. Okay. Now, some flowers are pollinated by birds. Okay. That is known as ornithophily. These terms are very, very important, children. Okay. Which birds? Bignonia, canna are the examples. Sorry, I said birds. It is not birds. I'm talking about plants. Which plants are pollinated by birds? Bignonia and canna. Okay. I think you have heard about hummingbird. What does a hummingbird do? It hums, isn't it? Makes a particular sound. That sound is coming from the, its wings. Quickly flaps its wing because it does not want to fly. It has to stay in one place and its beak is inside the flower, taking in the nectar. So before we move on to Entomophilous, let me tell you, children, on page number 42 of your textbooks, there is table 5.2. You can see here difference between wind-pollinated and insect-pollinated flowers. Very important. Put star mark here and learn it. We've already discussed the characteristic, so all you have to do is learn the difference. Now, moving on to the next type of pollination is Entomophilous. It is the pollination which is done by elephants. It is found in Rafflesia. If you remember, Rafflesia is the largest flower. I think you've learned in your general knowledge. Okay, these flowers are very large and are found growing on the ground level. The pollen grains of one flower get stuck to the feet of elephants. When the elephants are moving, they will stamp on the flower and the pollen grains will get stuck on the feet of the elephant, and as they move along, they may come across another Rafflesia flower and the pollen grains will drop down to the stigma of another flower when the flower gets trampled by their feet. Okay. Now, next, moving on to artificial pollination. Artificial means it is not natural, isn't it? So, when man himself transfers pollen to the stigma, then it is known as artificial pollination. That is, long time back, in the ancient civilization of Babylonia, there was a common practice to sprinkle male flowers of palms on the female flowers. Of course, at that time, they did not know about the sexuality of the palm flowers nor anything about pollination. But nowadays, people have become educated. They know about artificial pollination, also known as artificial crossing. Okay, it is a standard practice, especially done by people who work on flowers like plant breeders and scientists to find out new varieties. Okay, so what do is they remove the anthers in young flowers. This is known as emasculation. What is emasculation? Removal of anthers in young flowers. And then they cover these flowers with plastic bags. This is known as bagging. Okay, that means now that flower, they made that flower into a female flower. Only the pistils are left. So now it became a pistillate flower. The anthers have been removed. So later they pollinate such flowers with the pollen from the plants of the desired, whichever variety they want to. And then new varieties will be formed. Okay. Moving on to some examples of pollination. Okay, we take the example of a sweet pea, which is insect pollinated. So the insect, like the bee, alights on the conspicuous corolla. Alights means it sits. Okay, conspicuous means colorful. So the bee thrusts its long tongue in search of nectar. So here what happens is the wing petals of the flower are depressed. So there we have. So the wing petal, it comes here. So this wing petal gets depressed, means it will get pressed. Okay. So then after that, the wing petals along with the keel petal are forced down, and the stamens and stigma touch the underside body of the insect. So when they sit on here, the wing petal and the keel petal of the sweet pea plant gets depressed, and as a result it will move right inside. So when it moves right inside, the undersurface of the bee touches the anther and the stigma. Okay, so if the insect has already visited another flower, there may be some pollen sticking on its body. The pollen is transferred to the stigma of this new flower. So cross-pollination takes place. When the insect flies away, it will also carry some pollen of this flower to other similar flowers of the same species. And if cross-pollination does not take place, what will happen? Self-pollination will take place in this case, because it is a complete flower. Okay. Both the stamens and the carpels are enclosed inside the keel, and they are more or less at the same level. Now, next example we are taking is the wind-pollinated maize plant. Okay, it is brought about by the wind. Now, as the wind blows, the pollen from the outwardly hanging anthers in the tassel, okay, there, see, there, this is the tassel. So what do you have in the tassel? You will have the anthers. It is blown away easily because the anthers are loosely attached to the filament. Why is it loosely attached? So that the slightest wind will be able to carry them away. The slightest wind will shake them. The pollen is blown away by the wind, will fall on the feathery stigma of the female flower, which have a large surface. Okay, so the male flowers mature earlier than the female ones, so there are less chances for self-pollination. So here only cross-pollination takes place. So female inflorescence here is also known as the corp. So with this, I come to the end of this section of this chapter. In the next upload, we are going to talk about fertilization. So please go through, children. I will take a test till here, and I will inform you when in our WhatsApp group. Till then, children, stay safe. God bless you.